Right, good morning. Op Chandawa, dropped off at Uniform Sierra 662763 on the 18th of June. Then proceeded to the hill feature at Uniform Sierra 720745. Now we're going to stay at this lock for the remainder of the 19th of June. Our OP position is now overlooking Chitsato Crawl, where we will operate tomorrow morning. Right, it's tomorrow morning, it's the 20th of June. Based up at 704729, and at 8:20, 8 of the group went in and saw the crawl head Chitsato. He was pleased to see the group. He told them that the Mabunu are troubling them and that they have to go and make bricks. Apparently the SAP are building a camp. Lamek told the old man, they cannot talk here, let's rather go to our base camp. Also, we might be seen by security forces on the hill feature. When they arrived at the base camp, Chitsato told them that last week on Saturday they were bombing in that direction, indicating west. This was probably Fitz's contact. He said he did not see any of the tours after that, but he told the group that his son had gone for training in 1972 by the name of Titus. After his son had gone for training, he was arrested, interrogated, and returned back to his kraal. He then turned to one of his sons to go and kill a goat, but instead he killed a pig. So we had pork for lunch. After that, he stated that he was late for work, but would return here on the way back. The commander told him to keep his ears open whilst he was working up top there. On his return back to the base camp, he asked the group whether they had eaten. He told them we had not, so he organized one of his sons to bring the grace for us. He hadn't any info at this stage for the group, so Lamek told him that we would be moving from here, but if we do return, he must not forget us. And so, as we sit on this lonely gommel, looking at the surrounding area, birds seem to be all going home at this stage, and likewise with us. So, one more day ends in the life of a scout. Right, today being the 21st, we moved on to Uniform Sierra 781754, where we based up for the day and overlooking a large kraal complex. During the morning, we saw a couple of women strolling away for 5 in all, wandering in an easterly direction. I told the chaps to watch out for them and never saw them since. At approximately 11:45, one of the men on the OPs saw food being brought down to some tourists hiding under a bush. These tourists moved off into some rocky outcrops. We notified Zero Alpha, and meanwhile more food and women were traipsing backwards and forwards. Now in the distance you can hear the gunfire and the troops giving it a good rev. Listen. There we are. That is just one small contact of today. Roger. Now, as we listen to the noise of battle, and the birds have all pissed off to their various homes, we are still looking over the surrounding area, and, well, as in all days, one more day ends in the life of a scout.
Well, I'm with Ernest Hemingway. Now, I mean, Winston Hart. I always get confused, Winston. Winston, an old friend, married to a Naphtali girl, which is where I think you probably got it right, Winston. When you, but Winston,
I'm glad she's not here at the moment.
Winston, thanks a hell of a lot for doing this. I know it took a bit of persuasion. You're a very private guy, and you don't have an axe to grind. But I know that you understand we're trying to do this for history, and I really don't feel like I'm blowing your trumpet when I say there are few people around today who know as much about this particular history as you do. So we're very fortunate to have you have your time today. Thanks, Winston. Very grateful to you.
Well, thank you for those kind words. Anyway,
Winston, man, just back to the beginning. Where did it start? Where were you born? Where did you go to school?
Yeah. Well, that's a problem, because I went to Glenwood School in Midtown. And whenever I talk to anybody, I tell them that, it was a pity I went to Glenwood. All my mates.
Yeah.
No, I grew up in Durban. What happened was I went to junior school there, Addington School, and I have a brother, or he's now passed, was 13 years older than me, and a sister who was 10 years older than me. And so I didn't really know them that well.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mother remarried, and we went to Rhodesia. And I went to Nettleton School.
Okay.
And for a couple of three years, and then it was time to sort of get ready for high school. And all my family went to Glenwood and Durban. So, I chose that, and I was sent off to Natal and went to Glenwood and did what everybody else did. And I'll just tell you now that I used to go home. That's right, I went to boarding school. And when I was there, in my sort of fifth year, I spoke to my rugby sort of trainer, a chap called Basson, and we were practicing on the rugby field. And I said, "Sir, I won't be here next year. I'm going back home." He said, "Well, hang on." He said, "You can't do that, Hot man," he said, we can't do that. Why are you going back? I said, "Well, I'll never pass Afrikaans. And, it's just hopeless. So I'm going to go back." He said, "What you going to do?" So I said, "I'm going to join the British South African Police." He said, "Who are they?" So I said, "Well, they ride horses." So he then shouted across the rugby field. And he said to Hermie Creel, who was the scrum bloke, he said, Hermie, come over here." He said, Hermie trotted along, bald head and everything, and he said, "This bloody bloke, he wants to be a bloody cowboy, man." Because I told my son that they rode horses. He said, "This bloke wants to be a bloody cowboy, man." So then Hermie got hold of me. He said, "No," he said, "Look, we'll get you through your matric. We'll get you through. We'll give special message. I'll even write your exam." He said, "We need you next year for the bloody team." So anyway, I said, "No, sir, I won't be around." And I was 17 when I left school. And of course, I couldn't join the BSAP, but I could go into the cadets.
Okay.
And until I was 18, which I did. And then my sort of career started then. And, I can honestly say that it was the friendship between the people that I served with and the instructors I had. And I just loved my job. And it was really, really great.
So you started at Morris.
You
would have started at Morris Depot, Winston?
That's right, yeah. And after my 6 months training, as a cadet, I sort of did we had to stay. We weren't staying in the barracks. once the sort of month had passed, and had a menial sort of task in working on the police station, almost scrubbing the floors. But when I turned 18, I went back into depot and spent the 6 months, which was the time you spent. And it was actually very interesting, because once, and of course I played rugby, and that was the big thing with them. They wanted to keep me in Salisbury, and all I wanted to do was get out into the bush and ride bloody horses. I had this fixture in my mind. And
they wanted you for the rugby team.
Yeah. And one of my first gigs, as it were, was where the president had his pad.
Yeah.
On that sort of area. And I had a very good member in charge and stayed on the police station. I don't know if you remember Tom Rhodesia.
I didn't know him, but I remember watching him play rugby. Yes, he was a lock, wasn't
he? Yeah. And Tom was our captain. So I spent a couple of months there, and then they wanted to send me to traffic section. So I said, no, sir, I don't want to go to traffic section. I came to the police to ride horses in the bush. And now you're sending me to traffic section. I'm not going. So they said, well, we've got to keep you in town because you're playing rugby for us. Anyway, just so happened that they were bringing a batch of new horses up from South Africa to be trained and what have you with the police. They did this every so many years. So that's what I did. I got into the remount section, and we collected these bloody wild things off the train, and took months to try and train them. And that's when I met Peter Stanton.
Yes.
Who was a very good friend of mine, and he also joined CID in the end, and we sort of served together. And of course, he's gone. So, like so many of my mates have passed away. But
so Winston, you went from uniform branch to CID. When was that?
Well, after I'd finished, when the course had finished, or the horses had been trained, it was about 6 months. It was time to go back to I was still in the uniform job, sort of thing. I said to the powers to be, I said, all right, now I'm ready to go out to the bush. And they said, no, you're not going to the bush. We're going to send you to traffic section. I said, we've gone through this before. I said, no way do I want to go to traffic section. So they said, well, how about Rhodesville, which was another place quite close to
the
depot. So that's where I went, and I met up with a few. That's where I met Tom Rhodesia.
Right.
And of course, well, I've been playing rugby with him, but I mean, he had a big influence in my life. Old Tom. Poor bugger is now gone as well. And so from there, this change of job again came up. And after I'd had some time at Rhodesia, and still couldn't get to the country. So when that's right. Somebody said, no, you know what you should do is just try for CID. I thought, that's not too bad. And I did, and of course became a member of the CID. And from there, after a couple of years, I went into special branch. And because Peter Stanton and myself had worked together, he also came to CID. And we found ourselves in special branch together. And he was a very, very valuable guy because he was a bit more studious than I was. And he followed all the sort of things that I'd sort of dismissed about, special branch was purely in the sort of vein of keeping a track on what was happening in the country, sort of thing. Most of the problem was in the townships between the two main political groups, if we call it that.
ZAPU.
There was sorry?
ZAPU and ZANU were.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that
And of course,
what year is this, Winston? Just get us around the timing.
uh,
Probably late 60s,
early 60s.
early 60s, before UDI.
Yes.
So now there are rumblings in the townships, and you are,
yes,
and you're in special branch at this point.
that's right.
Okay.
And at
Winston,
time,
before we go into that, I just want to ask you, during your time at CID, were there any interesting investigations, criminal investigations that you were involved in that you want to talk about on a purely police level before we get into the political military type story?
no, there were. I mean, there was a CID. There was a few. So there were no murders or anything like that that I had to deal with. It was mainly, sort of, we had a few gun sort of related type things, and nothing of any consequence.
Okay. I was just, it's, well, the thing is, in those days, the country was incredibly peaceful, wasn't it? I mean, there wasn't
absolutely
a hell of a lot of.
Yeah. At one time, I was in charge of drug section, and nothing about drugs until I'd become a member of drug section, and then saw what was happening, of course, and that sort of was very interesting. But nothing out of the ordinary. The Congo was also rumbling in those days. People were going out of Rhodesia up to the Congo, and a few of my informers, I'm trying to think of his name, it was a real character. He disappeared. He was a youngster who got into trouble, got the girl pregnant, and that had this baby, and occasionally I'd bail him out because he was, I can't remember his name. God, Hannes, that's the problem. At my age,
not important. Winston, okay, let's move on to rumblings now in the townships. This is before UDI, and you guys are now gathering intelligence, I suppose, and trying to figure out what is going on and where it's all headed.
Well, we were gathering intelligence, and of course, Pete Stanton and I shared an office in Red Bricks, which was the sort of headquarters of Special Branch. And we were tracking down persons that were named, of course, and from and were sort of prominent in the various sort of ANC. And
so you would have had your eyes on people like Joshua Nkoma and Dominique Satoli.
Yeah, actually, the interesting thing was with old Joshua Nkoma. He'd gone up to, I think he'd gone up to the border to Amtali, and we heard he was coming back, and there was going to be a demonstration outside of Salisbury near the drive-in cinema, along that road, and they expected trouble. So I was sent up in my police car with my detective sergeant beside me and a pistol in the glove compartment. And we found this group just on the edge of the town. I'm trying to think of the name of the suburb, but anyway.
Probably Enterprise Road.
Just before you got to the drive-in, yes, it wasn't Enterprise Road, it was the one through Rhodesville, and it goes up past the drive-in cinema and on. It was quite close to the drive-in cinema. There was a little township there.
Okay.
And there was a crowd gathering with palm fronds and whatever to greet Nkoma as he came in with his sort of parade, as it were.
Yeah.
Entourage, yeah. And of course, we were sitting in this bloody, very obvious police car on the side of the road, watching these groups of guys sort of forming, and they obviously sort of saw us, and we thought we were good because nobody knew who we were. But anyway, they started to walk off. It was getting, the sun was setting, and I was speaking through the radio, I had a handpiece, and I was speaking into it, and I said, all right, this group looks as if they were going to demonstrate, but there's nobody arrived yet. It looks as if they're walking away, seem to be dispersing. Anyway, and I was just trickling along the side of the road, and all of a sudden, bloody rocks came from everywhere, smashed up the car. I tried to, we had a revolver in the glove compartment, and my sergeant was sitting beside me, and I said, Sarge, get the gun, get the gun. He said, I can't get the gun. And we went off into the donga, and he jumped out and ran into the long grass. And I managed to get the bloody gun out. But before that, a rock came through the windscreen and smashed the windscreen and smashed the handpiece. So I couldn't talk anymore. Blood was pouring out my head. And I jumped out of the car with the revolver, and I thought, I'm going to shoot anybody I see now. But sense prevailed, and I thought, no, shit, I better not. There's nobody around. I might shoot some granny watching TV or something miles away. So, and of course, I had no comm. But they had heard me talking about this crowd, and there was a right sort of squad waiting on the verge, and they heard this as they came and helped me to the hospital.
So that was your first brush with violence.
Oh yes,
Winston.
First,
and Winston,
so that was it.
Tell me, where were you? When UDI was declared? Do you remember where were you actually deployed at that point?
You know, we expected it to be declared, and we thought all hell was going to break loose, but it didn't at first. But we then started to see and hear. And of course, the farmers got a bit of started to happen on the farms, and old person was knocked over and what have you. But looking through my papers, you know, those things did happen, of course, and the you know, the murders started on the farms, and there were various things. And you know, I was sent to Bandura, and became the special branch bloke there, of course, and with my African policemen and detectives, we spent most of our time on the border with Mozambique. You know, it just so happened that that's where we knew something would happen. And I took over from a guy called Brett, and when I took it over from him, he said, Winston, he said, nothing happens here. He said, you know, I haven't gone over to Mozambique because I might get malaria. So he never crossed the border into, you know, Mozambique. But it was, and that's where I sort of based myself, because that's where it was all happening.
Let's just go back a bit. Up Cauldron, 1968. Insurgents through the Zambezi Valley, that doesn't work out for the enemy, and they go back and regroup and reorganize. Where were you during Cauldron? Were you in Bandura then?
I was at Bandura then, yeah.
Okay, and then if my memory serves, you were one of the early warnings. After that, you and I think Pete Stanton did warn about the possibility of them changing their tactic and a new front being opened in the northeast. Just talk us through a little bit about how you came to that conclusion. I don't think your warnings were taken too seriously, but you did have a very strong feeling that something else was going to happen, and your predictions were largely correct.
Yeah. Well, from Bandura, I spent most of my time at Mukumbura. And Mukumbura we were in touch with the Portuguese guys, of course, on the other side. And nobody from our side had ever been over there. And of course, I became very friendly with the guys at Mukumbura. And I knew we'd heard rumblings, and we'd interviewed people, and we'd seen guys come across the border in that area. And I spoke to my bosses at PJHQ sort of thing and Red Bricks. And, you know, I got a lot of help from them. And they said, listen, Hart, you're not supposed to cross the border, but we're not going to say anything. And this was, he spoke Portuguese. His name was Peter Burt, his name was. And he'd grown up in Portugal. Be friendly with the guys across the border, the Portuguese guys who spoke English as well. And so with their blessing, I used to go in to Mozambique and pose as I went in as a sort of surveyor.
Oh, yes,
and
theodolite.
I took in a theodolite. I took in a camera attached to a thing, and I claimed I was, you know, because Cabora Bassa was being built. And, you know, so I posed as a surveyor and roamed that area from Bujumbura to the Zambezi, and got to know a lot of people and heard a lot of things. And there was lots of things happening along that Zambezi River.
Yeah.
And my reports were going in, and we just knew that there was going to be a crossing somewhere along there, which in fact did happen. And Bujumbura was stomped. I eventually was blown up there in a vehicle. So we knew that we were on the right track. But the Portuguese were very helpful, you know, the guys that had been there for some time. And there were a couple of colored guys that had a bottle store just across the border.
Yeah.
And of course, they'd come backwards and forwards. And they told me, they said, listen, you know, there's strange people coming into the kraals around this area. And sure enough, you know, we did get crossings there. But that sort of took me further into the situation that developed along that border. We knew that that's where they're coming across. And then we had a few murders in that area. We never really got to grips with it. But our bosses in Salisbury, of course, realized that, you know, we were on the right track there. And that's when the military started to send guys to patrol the border. They put up fences. They started all sorts of, you know, things along that border because it was wide open. You could cross the river, you know, on foot into Mozambique, which we did.
Winston, at the time, though, the SAS were positioned up at Makombe on the Zambezi, so there was some sort of proactive action being taken.
Oh yes, it was happening, and I was very friendly with Brian Robinson, and again, you know, we played rugby together and what have you, but he did a lot to help, you know, me in my position, because at one stage they said, Hart, don't listen to these rumors, you know, because we had lots to tell them, and our superiors didn't really want to know about it seemed. But there were a few guys that did, of course.
So then, Winston, Altina Farm, the farm attacks, and that really triggers the next phase, the next phase of the war, and Op Hurricane opens up. So were you still in that area at that time when the farm attacks?
Yeah, I was, yeah.
And
I was, and we tried to anticipate, you know, these things happening, and we set up various sort of protective areas, and, you know, try to guess where these guys would cross. There were some that we managed to, and we were working with Sipalilo because they were also having a problem in their area. And I'm trying to think of the guy's name, who was my, you know,
Winston,
sort of the SP guy.
So Winston, things escalate. Tell us about how the unfolding events leading up to the formation of the Selous Scouts, how you got drawn into the whole process.
Well, as it was developing in our area, in Bujumbura, I realized that we'd have to put in some guys posing as the tours. And so I spoke to my bosses, and one or two of them weren't even going to acknowledge it because they said, no, we can't interfere across the border and whatever. But one of them did, and he was quite a high-ranking guy. He's now gone, but a wonderful man. And he said, Winston, I know you told me, but I haven't heard. Do it. And so what I did was I spoke to the military, and I said, listen, I want to put in a pseudo group. And they said, well, it seems to be a good idea, but, we can't. So I said, well, I really would like to have, access to your the trackers. And I knew a few of them. And they said, well, that seems a good idea, but I'm not too sure if the army would let you do that. Anyway, I got permission. And I spoke to one or two of the guys. And I don't want to mention their name. We had a group of them, and I found oh, that's right. Once I'd started, we had a few successes, just sort of minor ones, because we managed to find out where groups were starting to come in.
Winston, just I'll interrupt there because we can always worry about this later. But the guys that you drew in initially were Andre Rabi and Stretch Franklin from the Trekker Combat Unit.
Absolutely.
So you identified them as being the right kind of guys to try the pseudo concept, and so off they go, and they start coming back with very live, fresh information.
Yes, and that worked like a dream. They were so keen to get involved. And what we did is we started it, but we weren't having too much success. I needed help in servicing this group. Obviously, it was clandestine, and to get to them or get messages from them had to be on a different wavelength to the normal sort of military scene.
Yeah.
But I did arrange with the helicopter pilots, and I discussed it with one of the guys in the thing, and I said, listen, would it be possible to have a dedicated aircraft to help? Because, we would be ferrying these guys all around the place. And of course, we couldn't do it through just one of the helicopter jockeys. We had to have more sort of sound permission. And whilst I was doing this, I let Ronnie Daly, who was in the field, with his call signs, whilst I was trying to get this thing figured out, the police weren't interested in it. Of course, it was, too difficult for them. But I did get some help from the guys at Mount Darwin. Anyway, whilst this was going on, I happened to be sitting in the little office, sort of drinking a cup of tea when the door bashed in with Reed Daly and Jeremy Strong. And I really liked old Reed Daly. And he said, hey, Junior, as he always did, cup of tea, please. So I said, oh, it's good to see you. What do you come here for? He said, we believe you running this pseudo thing. So I said, all right, hang on, I'll get a cup of tea. And I said to him, aren't you guys supposed to be working? What are you doing here? Sort of thing. And he said, listen, we know you got your pseudo operation going, but we're taking it over from you. And you're going to come onto the staff. And just, but with us, we'll be able to get the right
support.
Touching the wrong blood, yeah. Anyway, he said, cup of tea, we'll talk about it later. And we did, and he said, listen, I've got the general to agree, and we're going to take this over, and you're going to be with us. So first of all, we need premises in the Bandura area, if that's possible. Do you know where we can find some place that'd be, sort of a way out of the way? And I did, in fact, know a place near Bandura itself, and it was on the mine, and they had an adjacent sort of bit of land where they had an old shack sitting that hadn't been used, but it had been part of the mine, sort of, I forget the mine's name. Anyway, I said, I think we'll be able to get that. And he said, all right, fine. I'm going to go and see the mine people, and we can see what we can do. So he said, but you're coming on, and you will have nothing to do with the actual police now. You can work for me. So that was great news. I really was enjoying that, and going to be enjoying that, I know.
So, Winston, if we could I just want to recap. So, when you initiated your pseudos, the scouts had already been formed. It was a fledgling unit, but they were in formation already.
No, they weren't.
No. Okay, so when you started running your guys, Ron probably was still in the RLI at that stage.
Yes, he was.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was just trying to establish. So the point I'm trying to make is that, in a way, it was a police idea. It was a police concept.
Oh yes, it was a police idea, and I'd actually got the idea from the ones that it happened in Kenya.
Yes.
Hunt for Kamathi.
Yes.
And that was in the foremost in my mind, and of course I did need our military to run with it, because I couldn't do it myself.
No, okay.
I tried, and we weren't getting much sort of go. But anyway, as I say, he appeared at my door with Jerry Strong, and as he always said, Junior, cup of tea. And so we started talking, and he said, all right, find this place near Bandura, which you say could be available, and we'll hire it for the mine. I did that. We got permission to use this place. It was derelict sort of building, and he came along, and he started to recruit guys for the Scouts, and he said, we're going to call it the Selous Scouts. And I said, well, why do we have to give it a name? Because that will, he said, no, we have to give it a name, because when we're getting stores and money to pay the guys and what have you, and get all the details, we'll need clothing and all the rest of it. We have to have a name for this group that we've got, and we're going to call it the Selous Scouts. Anyway, it started then, and then we got all our kit from a guy in Bandura who I knew very well. He was a Cypriot, and he had a trading store. A wonderful, wonderful man, And so we got all the T-shirts and clothing from him. Sort of, it wasn't uniform stuff from the military, and kitted the guys out, and we established the guys in this little broken down farmhouse, and they put up tents, and they put up, they rebuilt it. He brought in all these guys. The funny thing was, he had two guys that worked from an RLI, and both had their arms blown off. Forget their names now. One, so they were the guys that put up the maps and things, And there was always one arm for one side of the map and one arm for the other two guys. And it was it was fantastic. The camaraderie was great, and it could only do well, which it did. And as I say, we started then, and at that stage, when I had my own pseudo thing, those guys came on board as well. One of the, I'm trying to think of his name. I went back to the tracking thing. He said, "No, it's a bullshit. I'm sitting on these bloody mountains and I'm not doing anything." And going back to the tracking wing. Clements was his name. You remember?
Pete Clements,
lovely. Yeah, Pete Clements. He's a lovely guy. So he left us, but the other guy stayed, and we started to get going. And it worked very well. And unfortunately, I got to meet a lot of other guys. Two of them never came back from one of our jobs. They got shot. And it was very traumatic for me because I got to know these guys so well.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them were great guys, And it worked. But not before the cost sort of we had to bear. And that was a couple of guys, as I say, Franklin, I think. I'm not too Franklin.
Yeah, Stretch Franklin, Andre Rabi, both.
Andre Rabi.
Both good.
And so it was very sad. But that's what it was.
Winston, just talk us through the modus operandi. How?
Yeah, I'll tell you what it was. The idea was we would try and establish where these guys were. We would send guys in dressed as, but mainly Africans, and carrying AKs and what have you, and getting in touch with them and then telling them that we had been deployed, and where were they working and that sort of thing, and once we'd done that, it wouldn't have been a very sort of lengthy sort of progressing thing. Long as we knew they were in the vicinity, we send a message to them and say, listen, we also are here and we must get together sometime and that sort of thing. And we started to have success because one of the guys on our team was old Dale Collett. And Dale Collett in those days, because he came aboard because he was a linguist and could speak a number of African languages, and we became very good friends. And I remember on this one occasion, I got a call from him to say that they'd got and that he would be stationing himself in this particular place. And my instructions were that as soon as they met somebody, I would come in to see how it was going. And then we hoped that those persons would show us where the other groups were. And it seemed to be working. So we had a ordained helicopter. He was called in, took me up to this place that they were hidden in. They dropped me. I'd have to walk a little bit and then somebody would meet me and walk me in. And on this occasion, it was the first one we had. So it was quite a venture. And I remember walking in, it was just as the sun was setting. And we sat on a fire on this hill. And the guys pointed out who this was. He was a small guy, and he was chatting to some of the other guys, all black guy. We listened to the story. He said he had a group down the road and he was with that group, and we should go and meet them and that sort of thing. And I listened to all of this, and then came the time. They'd taken his weapon from him and they'd taken the powder out, the bullets, and gave him the back. Oh no, they hadn't given him back. Anyway, when we heard the story, he was we definitely had his AK. We called him to the little group I was sitting at, and I think it was Franklin or somebody said, listen, we just want to explain to you, this is not what you think. And I took my hat off and my bloody old coat, and he could see I had white hair and a white face. Half of it was white. And he had this funny laugh. It was sort of a half laugh and very nervous laugh. And the guy said, all right, you've been caught. We are the soldiers. And he couldn't understand this. You see, he tried to carry on. He said, no, hang on a minute. You captured. This is the Mzungus here that have captured you. and he almost went white. And we said, all right, fine, let's do the thing. We gave him back his weapon. We said, now, we're not going to touch you. We're not going to harm you. You're going to work with us. But we need to know where your men are. Well, he was so relieved, but a bit sort of worried because he didn't know what was going to happen. At that same time, we got a call from one of the, can't remember where it was, but it was a farming area where there'd been an attack. And of course, we had Franklin and we had Adrian. Franklin was going to this farm attack and check it out. And I said, all right, well, let's go off and have a bit of a rest. We'll take you out and get to know this guy a bit better, and then we can go in again. Andre
Robbie
then said, listen, yeah, he said, I'm not going to go. I'm going to stay here because, but I said, look, don't move because we need to make sure that nobody else comes into this area and finds you and then, opens up. He said, no, I'll just sit up on the top of a hill and wait for Stretch to come back. Which he did. I then took off back to Salisbury, basically. And about a day later, I got a message to say that there'd been a problem. Adrian had been killed. And what had happened, Andre being killed, what had happened was he went up and sat on the hill as he said he would, but then he heard over the network that they were following up on a group of Turks, and he realized that he was fairly close. So he thought he'd go down, be in that area if they, came his way, which he did. What happened was he went down to this river, and most of it was still sandy, and there was a pool at the one end. And he led these guys go and, do a bit of fishing in this pond. And they were piddling around in the pond trying to catch these fish. Andre took his camera, left his weapon on the bank, went down to the pond, and he was taking pictures of them, trying to catch these fish. When the RLI came around, because they'd heard they were in the area, and they came around on the river line, and they heard this noise down around the bend. And of course, they were now, sort of switched on. And as they came around, they saw guys in a Tur uniform. Well, there wasn't a uniform, straggling bits of clothing, whatever. And they opened up straight away, and they hit Andre, and of course killed him. That everybody fled except that had been captured a couple of days before. He held the guy's head and was sobbing when the RLI guys got to him, because they realized there was something wrong here. And of course, it was just one of these very, very sad tales.
Winston, something of particular interest. This is prior to Op Hurricane in 72, the attacks on Altina Farm. You are based in Bandura, and are you spending a lot of time at Mukumbura interacting with the Portuguese and gathering information? Just tell us how you were actually doing that.
Well, my territory, of course, was down in that valley. And I knew what was going on through the special branch sort of network. And I was the special branch man in Bandura. There were CID and there was special branch. I had my boss was actually the CID guy, and I was the special branch bloke. Mm-hmm. And my daily sit reps came from special branch headquarters. So I was aware of what was happening throughout the country. And I would, in fact, use that, and I would send out my staff, and I would go to Mukumbura, because that's where I had contact with the Portuguese across the border. Of course, having made friends with the guys over there, I then went further towards the Zambezi to see how things were happening. At the beginning, we didn't have Portuguese soldiers or troops coming down to the border, but things were starting to happen, and we had people that we'd sort of got to work for us in that particular area. And they were saying that the guys were coming down through, there was a place called the Train Mountain, and that's where they were situated. We got all sorts of bits of information about, they didn't call them terrorists, they just said men were coming through. And but we couldn't sort of work out exactly what their mission was. But it became obvious that they were coming down to the border to see where they could cross into Rhodesia at this particular place. I stayed down there almost all the time, trying to get people to work for me. And that's how we did it. We went to the kraals, we went to the headman. We, through my police cohorts, I had lots of good detectives working with me. And we started to get information that these guys were coming down in that area at Mukambura. So I stayed there, moved up and down, went up to, there was an African seminary up on the escarpment. I'm trying to think of the name, where I got to know the priests up there. And they also said there were some strange happenings in this area. Things developed, and we knew that we just had to make contact with these guys. And what I did then was I decided that we would get people to pose as terrorists. And, we dropped them off. They would sort of make contact with the population and then find out where the other boys were. And so that's how it wasn't an immediate sort of thing. And it took some time to get ourselves sort of instilled in that sort of situation. It took a long time.
I just want to butt in there. So you were sending reports back to your seniors,
yes,
indicating that there was a buildup of some sort of enemy presence.
Yes.
So that was going to a higher level.
Yes.
Was the reaction adequate in your view, or were they tending to take this a bit too lightly?
No, they weren't taking it too lightly. In fact, we started to get our soldiers come down to the border because we thought and we said it's starting to, escalate. So they started sending people down to the border to patrol the border. And of course, we were able through them to explain what we'd heard. And then I decided then we needed a pseudo sort of operation where we play the game. I spoke to my bosses in Salisbury and suggested to them this is what we do, and they gave me carte blanche because it was my territory. And I immediately got hold of guys in the military guys, the tracking unit, because a lot of it done with footprints, and we had these little cards which showed you the Russian boot and the Chinese boot and that sort of thing. And these guys were good at tracking, and we started to get results.
Winston, I want to butt in there again. I'm interested to hear that it was the Kenya Mama experience that you knew about, because I've just been actually reading up on that, and fascinating. It was a policeman by the name of Henderson who played a very big part in bringing the Mama to an end by infiltrating the Aberdares forest. And so you'd obviously read up on that and saw that it was relevant to what was unfolding in your territory.
Absolutely. I read that book before I joined the police. It was Hunt for Kamathi. It was called
Yes.
Hunt for Kamathi.
Yes.
And it was Henderson. And I had this idea that we could play the same game.
Mm-hmm.
And Ronry Daly, funny enough, was on the border because they sent troops down to the border. And he was with RLI then.
Mm-hmm.
And as an officer, he asked to meet up with him, and I knew him through rugby. And we spent a lot of time together, and we discussed this pseudo thing. And I started to put people in, just ordinary guys, and ask them to, go into that place and see if they could see any strangers and find out what the locals were doing. Because we did get information from the locals that there were these strange people coming in, and they were told to do this and told to do that, but they didn't know what was going on. Taking that previous Hunt for Kamathi sort of situation, I thought the only way we'll find out is to put guys in, plain clothes and, get them to, sort of pose as terrorists, which they did. It was quite difficult because we had to have a base, and we actually started off right up at Mount Darwin,
mm-hmm.
and we had a base there, and we used the houses belonging to Internal Affairs.
The district commissioner.
The district commissioner, and we were on good sort of standing, and I didn't tell him what I was going to do, but I said we wanted to put some guys into one of their houses just to keep them undercover. Did they have any accommodation? So they gave me a house, and we got some of the tracking guys through, and people that could speak the lingo.
Mm-hmm.
Franklin was one of them.
Robbie,
and the little guy, the tracker,
Pete Clements.
Mm-hmm. So I used those guys, and at night we sort of drove them down to the border and left them there, and then picked them up and we sort of monitored them all the time, and things started to happen.
So Winston, they were now blackening up. These were white guys blackening up as to make themselves look like insurgents, and going in with small groups of your police guys as
no, they were on their own with a couple of guys the army guys.
Okay.
But or if we had some, they weren't police guys from the uniform branch. They were just guys that we used before as informers.
Mm-hmm.
And gradually we started to get more and more information, and we knew it was working. Then we had problems with the Internal Affairs because they knew something strange was happening. All these people accommodate, and they couldn't get into couldn't find anybody during the day because they'd all be hiding away in their rooms and whatever. And the white guys had black paint on them, and they couldn't wash it off every day. But it was a sort of juggle to get them down to the border, leave them for a few days, and we were in contact through the radio, and things started to happen. It was looking very promising, and I have a photograph actually which shows you Clements and the guys, the very, very first pseudo gang. It was working, and we knew it was working. And then I was bumping into Reed Daly quite often down at the border with these RLI guys. And of course, we knew each other through the rugby, and, he used to first come in and, he had that sort of way about him. He said, "Come on, Junior, tell me what you're doing." So I can't tell you, you're not cleared for it. We had a good rapport, and eventually he said, "Winston, whatever we can do, we'll help you," And it used him and his men, but it was just not, it was too formal.
Mm-hmm.
It had to be completely, informal. And we struggled on this thing, and we didn't really we had success, but nothing, that was going to sort of ring the bells and say we found the answer. And I was basically using them as informers. And they were giving me stuff, and we were getting progress, but it was taking a long time. Then eventually, one of my, Peter Stanton was also with me. We'd been in special branch together. We shared the same office, and we discussed it. He had all he'd get all the bits and pieces together. And he had a bloody big metal trunk with all the files in it, which he used to drag around the valley, with all his bits of paper in it. And he was a marvelous man, actually. And we sort of worked on this thing, and it was working, but it came to a head. And my bosses at Red Bricks in town said, look, they thought it may be better if we did a bit more penetration into Mozambique. And I'd been juggling with this through the Portuguese at the border post. And I got to know those guys very well. I stayed over there most of the time because they had accommodation there and we didn't have it on our side. And there were one or two guys that were really, really helpful. We started to, as I say, get more information. There was a bottle store there, and there were funny people going to that bottle store. And Abdul, his name was, or Abbo. And we knew he was dealing both sides of the coin, and he'd always call you your worship and all that sort of thing, and very helpful. But we knew that something was happening, so I went further and further in. And then we worked out a scheme, I think I might have mentioned earlier in this discussion, but where I took in a theodolite, trying to be
as a land surveyor.
Surveyor, and can't even say the bloody name. But anyway, that also worked because I was able to photograph people right on the river at the Zambezi, and I used to leave my Land Rover on the water, and they'd send a boat for me to go across. And we used to go and visit a guy who wasn't poaching, but he was getting hides and horns and that to sell. A Portuguese guy on the coast, and he said, "No, Winston, these guys are hanging around. I've seen them carrying AK weapon." And there was one guy, I think his name, it wasn't Abu, but it was, I keep on forgetting the name of the guy. He said, "Oh, he had a weapon left by one of these guys." And I said, well, show me. And he pulled out this SKS, and he said, "Oh, this guy left it behind." And he knew exactly what he was. He was going down, to Beira, and he had been with a group, and the group had gone somewhere else. So we knew it was all happening, in Mozambique. And I got permission to actually go into Beira and meet up with the chief sort of guy there. They weren't that helpful, they really weren't that helpful. The main, I forget his name as well. He was the main sort of bloke.
From Portuguese intelligence.
Sorry?
The main guy from DGS, Portuguese intelligence in Beira.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you remember the name?
No,
he was pulled up when they had the coup. He was pulled up when they had the coup in Portugal, and he did a runner, and the South Africans pulled him out and drove him he came out to Rhodesia.
Okay, no, I don't remember. So, but they weren't very forthcoming with information.
They weren't very helpful. Yeah, I went down to see him. He said, "Oh, come and see me in Beira." I went down there, and I was flown down there. One of my farmer friends took me down, and we were waiting in the office of this guy. And he came down and he said, "Listen, Winston, the guy hasn't pitched up, so I'm afraid, I've got nothing to tell you." So Ludgater, his name was, he flew me down, Bill Ludgater. He said, "Oh, shit, I've taken off from the farm and let's go for a joyride." So I said, "No, well, just hang on." And then I met a soldier, came down the road, and it was he was the son of this guy. And I said, "Look," I forget his name. I said, "You haven't, we heard that there was some down here." And he said, yes, I brought them in from Mukumbura. We arrested them. And I said, where are they? He said, they're in the prison. So we went back to this guy and we said, listen, we've just heard that these people are here. You've got one or two,
Insurgents.
budding terrorists. Oh, he said, yes. Oh, I've just heard that myself. So then he organized a sort of meeting with them. So he said, all right, we'll meet me at the airport. We'll use a room there and I'll bring them in. So Bill and myself went down. Bill Ludgate and myself went down to the airport, and instead of flying off, we waited in the office of this guy, and they brought this bloke in handcuffed. I've got his name somewhere. I can't remember it, and we said, can we ask some questions? And he admitted he was one of the group's terrorists. And we said to this guy, we said, but you said he wasn't here. He said, oh no, well, I forgot. And he's going to Portugal. We're going to send him off to, Byra, and we're going to do this and do this. And so it was just a complete bloody horse's ass. And I knew then that they were coming through.
Winston, were these guys Frelimo or were they Zimbabwe-based guys that planning on coming?
Frelimo.
No, Frelimo. But were they able to tell you anything about the ZANU plans to build up and come in through the northeast?
Well, at that stage, this guy couldn't, because we were told, look, he's had enough time, and I'm sorry he can't tell you anymore. But that confirmed it for me. I knew that they were coming down the pipeline from Zambia,
right,
on that side of the river.
Yeah.
Anyway, then my bosses in Salisbury sort of said, all right, fine, we're going to send you a Portuguese-speaking guy. And he was in Special Branch with us. And he came down, and we did a lot of research in Mozambique. And we were on the right track. They were using that part of the country to come in and over the river and come into Rhodesia.